Well, it's good morning from him, and of course, it's a good morning from me. I hope everybody's well. Welcome to my mortgage live stream, live on YouTube, on to Facebook, and LinkedIn, because that's the place to be, isn't it? Although it's not necessary, it depends on your consumer, of course. Whatever social media you decide to go on depends where your customers come from, which is why I still don't go on TikTok yet, because I don't think our customers are based on TikTok. But that's probably all changing. Apparently, the election's been elected on TikTok this year. Even Rishi Sunak's done a couple of TikTok videos, which is quite a crazy thing, isn't it? Election only a few weeks away, making a big difference. Read this weekend that interest rates probably in August going to go down by a little notch, maybe earlier. We'll wait and see. But inflation's a bit sticky still. So after the election, always get a property boost. Always have done. Look at every election. So things will certainly be getting a bit buoyant in July, August. A lot of people will be on Rightmove, you see, doing lots. So you need to get in touch with all your customers, even if you're on your Ollie Bobs during August time, because they will be thinking possibly of moving in September onwards. Makes things good for us, doesn't it? Of course it does. So quick live stream today. I want to give you a bit of an update on stamp duty. Not because you asked for it or wanted it, but it's important that you do so, because there's been a couple of little tweaks in the autumn statement, which of course has affected the new tax year. But of course, with any new government that comes on in, it's probably going to all change anyway, but we'll wait and see, shall we? So that's what I've got planned for you today. So I hope all is good for you. Hope all is well, and the world's good, and you're enjoying some sunshine. Maybe you've got a few weeks coming up in the school holidays. You've got some time off, possibly, or you're busy bustling away, making things happen in your business. But like all booms and busts and cycles, it always cycles back up again. And I think this autumn may well see some activity moving in your direction. But let's get into stamp duty. So I'm going to head on over to some slides for this, and we're going to jump in and give you some descriptions of these things as well, because we've got some stuff that we've pre-prepared for you as well. So when it comes to stamp duty land tax, as you know, of course, there's a lot of figures and stats and numbers. And here's a tax sheet which has it all on there, which I'm going to zoom in for you in a second so you can see this. And the whole point about stamp duty land tax in the exam, the CMAP exam, is being able to do the calculations. There's lots and lots of calculations in CMAP 3, as you can appreciate. A few in CMAP 2. Doesn't tend to rear its head in CMAP 1. And you're not going to be doing complicated calculations unless, of course, you've got a CMAP 3 case study that looks at things like shared ownership or divorce with considerations and things like that. The plain bog standard stamp duty is not a difficult thing to calculate as long as you've got your numbers. And here's the numbers. As you can see here, I've got up to 250 at naught, and then you've got your 5%, 10%, 12%. And you've got your first time buyer discount, 425. On properties up to 625,000, you've got your residential properties with an extra percent as well. So you've got your surcharges and things and stuff like that. So there's quite a lot of numbers that you need to be aware of, but they're always in kind of like a tax sheet, depending on which exam you're doing, or they'll give you the numbers if you're doing an exam without a tax sheet. So you don't need to memorize them, but actually they're not that complicated really. In England and Northern Ireland, naught up to 250, and 5 between 250 and 925. In Scotland and Wales, of course, it's different. You have different numbers. But if you get questions on them, they'll give you the numbers. You won't need to worry about memorising them, because there's a lot of them. Here's the Scottish residential boundaries here and barriers, and here's the Welsh ones as well. They're all just different because devolved governments do things differently. It's the whole point about being devolved. If you didn't do things differently, there'd be no point being devolved, would there, at the end of the day? So that's your numbers. So let's go into some calculations and some situations. I've got several for you just to illustrate all the stamp duty rules and regulations. And remember, as a mortgage advisor, you're not a lawyer. You don't need to fill in the stamp duty returns on completion of the purchase. You don't need to answer the questions the client has. Well, what if this? What if my boyfriend lived in France and owned a property, sold it before he moved back here? Now he's not a first-time buyer, but he is a first-time buyer. What if? Get the lawyer to solve those problems. Here's the basic ones for you. So first case study for you. I've got two people here. Jess White, her boyfriend Andy Smith, are buying a house in Lincoln for 625 for the first time. Okay, the Lincoln thing, by the way, is just a red herring. It's not very important. So what's going on here? Well, these are first-time buyers. They're buying for the first time, the first property that they're buying. And by the way, you don't need a mortgage for that. If you've inherited a property, it's the same thing. You're not a first-time buyer anymore. Now, the limits, of course, 625 is quite important. And so let's just take a look at the answer to this one then. So first of all, it's nil below 425. It's a first-time buyer exemption. There's no stamp duty for these guys to pay because they're both first-time buyers. If one of them was not, it still wouldn't count, by the way. You both have to be first-time buyers. And the property is a maximum of 625,000. But I read at the weekend that 95% of first-time buyers don't buy more than 625 as a purchase price. That's quite a purchase price, isn't it? Unless, of course, you're in London. That's the maximum price for first-time buyer relief, as we said as well. But there will be obviously no stamp duty because the property, if you just go back here, there will be stamp duty. They're buying at 625, so there will be an element of stamp duty above the nil exemption first time buyer. So you just need to work out the rest of it for him as well. That's easy peasy. So it's a nice straightforward one for first time buyers. So there'll be a percentage payable above the 425, by the way, that's what I'm saying to you. Okay, here we got Pippa and her fiance are buying a flat in Leeds for £400,000 for the first time. Her fiance is going to rent the house he inherited from his gran in Selby, that should be in, not is, to help cover the mortgage. So the fiance is not a first-time buyer, which is interesting. He might think he is, because I've never had a mortgage before, he might say. But, it's below the 45, so we're good there, 400,000. And the fiance is going to rent the house to get a bit of money coming in. So what would happen here, of course, looking at the numbers, you're actually buying a second home now as well. Not only are they not first-time buyers, he's buying a second home because the fiance wants to buy the property as well. Now, once you buy a second home, that whacks in the 3% second home surcharge. It's just on top of all the other rates. Now, they're not first-time buyers anyway because he's already owns a property. So the first 250 at 3%, because it's the surcharge, by the way, it would be naught otherwise, wouldn't it? The next 150 at 8%, that's 5% plus the 3% surcharge. So a whacking great big 19 grand and a half in stamp duty. A lot of money, that. A lot of money, which is preventing a lot of movement in the housing market. Okay, so just take a look at that situation. When the fiance saw the stamp duty land tax bill, he changed his mind and is now going to sell the house now instead. So he's going to sell it and coincide the sale of his house with buying the new house. So he's not now buying a second home. He's not a first-time buyer. That's irrelevant. So he's not there. So what's going to happen here? There's no first-time buyer rate because he already owns a home, which is fine. So the first 250 now is at 0%. Because everybody has 0% on that. Then the next 150 at 5% brings the stamp duty land tax down quite nicely, doesn't it? 7,500. So yeah, from 19 odd grand to 7,500, a hell of a difference that it makes, isn't it, in that situation? Because they're now buying a second home. Okay, now take a look at that one for you. Pippa's had a change of mind about her fiance and buys on her own with a rent-a-room mortgage with the Bath Building Society, which was at last week. So she doesn't even want to buy. She wasn't to pay that sort of stamp duty. She buys on her own. Then she's a first-time buyer, and therefore she won't need to worry about that at all. So she's going to save herself a lot of money doing it that way. So she's kicking him off the mortgage, which I think is quite funny. Now, of course, it's nil as it's below 425, first-time buyer exemption. Okay, just an example there for you about first-time buyers. Now, another example for you. Rory Abramovich is buying a mansion in Kensington for £20 million through his offshore company, Roman Villas Incorporated. So what's the rate of stamp duty? Obviously, 20 million is a big amount of property there, isn't it? It's a big purchase price. And what we look here are called the special 15% non-natural companies or oligarchs. I love that name, don't you? I'm a Russian oligarch. It just sounds fantastic, doesn't it? Well, they're not really. So it's 15%. So that's a hell of a lot of stamp duty that they're going to have to pay. But that's a case of robbing the rich to pay the poor, isn't it? So that's the rule around oligarchs, which is quite straightforward. Here's another example for you. Gemma Brown and her hubby bought a London terrace in Islington for £1,250,000. So Islington, the home of Jeremy Corbyn, apparently is coming out as an independent this year. It's a very expensive part of London, of course, and they're buying a property for 1.2. So what's the stamp duty? So let's take a look at the numbers then. First 250 at naught, everybody gets that. Then you got the next 675 at 5%. So it's quite a lot of money involved there as well. But above that, to the maximum, then you've got it at 10%, because that's just the way the figures work. So you've got a whopping great big 61 grand in stamp duty. So you can see how expensive that is for people living in London to move. That's a lot of money purely to be paid in stamp duty into tax into the government's coffers. So Gemma Brown and her husband are now looking to buy a seaside property in Porthleven, Cornwall, to be used as a family getaway second home. Very nice too, isn't it? You can do that. Just buy a property, have it as a bolt hole by the seaside. But a lot of people do. It costs £450,000. So what's this going to cost then? How much is this involved here? Let's take a look at the numbers. Well, again, you get 3% second home rate because it's a second property they're buying. Doesn't matter whether they rent it or not. It's slapped at 3% on all of the bands. So the first 250 now comes in at 3%, where previously that was nil. So that's 7,500. Then the next 200,000 at 8%. It's the 5 plus the 3, 16 grand. So they're now paying £23,000 on a property of 450. That's a big chunk of money. But then again, people buying second properties, I guess, can afford it. That's the political argument to that one. Has been criticised a lot recently in the press, stamp duty. It has ground up or clogged up the housing market. When I bought one of my properties in the 90s, it was 1% on the whole purchase price, above a certain figure. So it has rocketed up quite considerably in the last 20, 25 years. Okay. Martha Hanley is buying a flat in York for her son, who's attending university in the autumn. Now, she intends for him to live in the flat rent-free, very nice, for the 3-year degree process. Martha has a property in Oxford worth £750,000. It's an interesting one, this one, because she's obviously buying a second home if she does it that way, but the son is a first-time buyer. So what's the detail here? Well, an extra 3% stamp duty because it's a second home. So that's the ruling there. In fact, if we went back to that one, she may not be doing it in the right way. She could do a sole proprietor, a joint mortgage sole proprietor mortgage, where he, the son, is the owner of the property and buys the property himself. But she's on the mortgage, if you like, controlling the purse strings. It's called a joint mortgage sole proprietor. He's the sole proprietor, but there's a joint mortgage with her and him on it. Quite acceptable. If she's got income, of course, to be able to afford it, I think she probably has. He would then be the first-time buyer because he's a sole proprietor. So that would probably be a better way of doing that. You'd avoid that extra 3% stamp duty. Albert and Jill Braithwaite are trying to sell their main residence, which is on the market for £500,000, but it won't budge because the housing market is not too good at the moment. So they obtained bridging finance, which is not a difficult thing to do, to buy their new home now. So they're buying at 750. So they've gone for bridging, which usually does crossover charging and all sorts of ways of securing the loan. And they haven't even got their house even on the market. So this is an open bridging situation, so very expensive. So what happens here then? Because they're buying a main residence, selling their main residence, buying another main residence. So unfortunately, if they get charged the tax, but they do. So the extra 3% is due on the new home, but extra will be refunded if the main residence is sold within 3 months, 36 months, 3 years. So first 250 at 3%. I've done that calculation a few times. Next 500 at 8%. So they've got to pay 47,500. But of course, that extra that's been charged will be refunded within 3 years if they sell the house. And they should do, because that's the purpose, isn't it, of the bridging finance. Most bridging lenders want the whole thing settled up for a year anyway. Otherwise, it makes it regulated mortgage, and they don't particularly like that. So that's an interesting one, isn't it? Mike Thompson has a property. He's a property developer. He's bought a whole row of 5 terrace properties in a pretty rundown area, overlooking the river, but they're very nice. So they total £1 million in total, but the end terrace houses are each worth 300. So the inner terrace properties are much cheaper, as you can appreciate. Now, this is where it's changed a little bit, so you may be aware of this, may not. But in the budget, or in the finance statement, they abolished multiple dwelling relief, as they called it. The abolition of multiple dwelling relief, MDR, because we love an acronym, don't we? We've got to get rid of these acronyms, they're ridiculous, for SDLT.
effective on the 1st June 2024. So he hasn't, because what they used to be able to average it out, what used to be done this, so you take the average of 1 million divided by 5 properties, first 200 at nil, plus 3%, obviously, because he's buying second properties. And then you multiply it by 5, which would have given you a big discount overall. That's how they used to do it, but that's now been abolished. So he has to now pay stamp duty individually on each of the properties, which will actually work out more expensive. But hey, that's the way it goes, isn't it? Okay, here's one for you. Jerry Hollywell is buying a shared ownership house for herself and her 2 boys. Great property purchase mechanism, shared ownership. Property's valued at $300,000, but she's only buying a 50% stake to start with. She intends to staircase the further 50% in a few years' time when her salary increases. Her boyfriend is not a first-time buyer. Obviously, she's buying with her boyfriend. So we're looking here at normal rates of stamp duty. So what happens then with shared ownership? Well, you've got a choice here. You can pay it all up front or pay it in stages. If she chooses to pay on the amount she buys each time, there would be nothing to pay this time, as it is £150,000 below the nil threshold. Buying the next stage will probably incur stamp duty, land tax. Well, there's a lot of different rules for this one. So she's buying at 300, but she's only buying a 50% stake, you see, which is below it. So if she opts to pay on each tranche that she purchases, she won't pay stamp duty, land tax on the shared ownership property, which is interesting, isn't it? Okay, last one for you. Beryl and Tone are divorcing and splitting the family home. Tony agrees to move out and come off the mortgage deed in return for a settlement, which is known as a consideration, of £100,000. Now, this is quite an interesting one, and you'll probably get case studies in CMAT 3 based around this, where you have a transfer of equity. In other words, Tony's coming off the mortgage, but for him to come off the mortgage and the house, of course, Beryl's got to give him £100,000 settlement or consideration. Think about it logically. He's moving out of the house and coming off the mortgage, and in consideration of that, she's giving him some money because he probably would have owned that in the property. Now, that consideration is actually liable to stamp duty. Not a lot of people know that. Obviously, the amount of consideration liable to stamp duty is the amount given to exchange. It is below the 250, so there's no tax to pay here, which means that most people don't think it is payable. But the consideration is actually potentially liable because effectively you're buying Tony's share of the property for £100,000, aren't you? And if you buy property or land, you have to pay stamp duty, land tax, naturally. So as you can appreciate, therefore, quite a lot of rules and regs when it comes to stamp duty there for you. Some updates of numbers and figures and things for you, but all good update for you, hopefully. Hopefully you enjoyed that. Bye. Well done. Okay. Nice and easy. Lemon squeezy, as they say. So there's a bit of update for you on stamp duty. We're continuing to update again our boot camps now for the new tax year, which come into effect in August. So all these new videos are going to go onto the boot camp so people can get all the update information for you as well. And we're updating revision guides and all those sort of things as well. As always, if you guys want to get onto our mailing list, there's the QR code, or you can just email me if you want to. It's not that difficult. There's a link at the bottom of the show notes, so you can do that for you as well. Other than that, I'm going to wish you a fantastic week to enjoy yourselves. Have great fun in the sun, as they say, and we'll be back next Monday for another live stream. See you soon. Bye.